The crystalline halls of the Valaxian flagship resonated with each of Raven Blackwood's footsteps as the guards escorted him to his fate. His worn engineering uniform, still bearing the insignia of the Terran Space Corps, stood in stark contrast to the immaculate corridor's gleaming surfaces. The past week in the brig had given him plenty of time to contemplate how he'd ended up here, captured during a routine maintenance mission on the edge of human space. The guards, their bioluminescent scales pulsing with shades of blue and green, stopped before massive doors that seemed to be made of living metal. They parted silently, revealing a command center that took Raven's breath away. The entire front wall was transparent, offering a view of the galaxy that would make any engineer weep with joy. But it was the figure standing at the center of the room that commanded his attention. Supreme Commander Thera turned to face him, her iridescent scales shifting through colors he didn't have names for. Unlike the other Valaxians he'd seen, her presence carried an almost tangible weight. "Engineer Blackwood," she spoke, her translator rendering her words in perfect English. "Your reputation precedes you." Raven raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I wasn't aware I had a reputation among the Valaxian Empire. The human who redesigned the quantum drive mid-flight to save his crew? Who turned a mining laser into a defense system during the Centauri pirate raids? Yes, we keep track of such things." She moved closer, her height forcing him to look up. "Which is why you're here instead of in a prison camp." "I'm flattered," Raven replied, keeping his voice steady. "But I assume this isn't a social call to discuss my engineering achievements." Thera's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. "Direct. Good. We face a crisis that requires your particular expertise. Our quantum cores are failing across the fleet. Our scientists are baffled. And you think a human engineer can solve what your experts can't?" "I think," she moved to a holographic display, bringing up technical specifications that made Raven's eyes widen, "that human ingenuity approaches problems differently. Your species has a remarkable talent for finding solutions where others see only obstacles." Raven studied the data floating before him, his mind already racing with possibilities. "These readings, they're not just failing, they're evolving. Adapting in ways they shouldn't be able to." He looked at Thera with new understanding. "You're not just worried about losing power to your ships. You're afraid of what they're becoming." The Supreme Commander's scales darkened. "If you can help us understand and stabilize the cores, you'll earn not just your freedom, but a place as a valued ally of the Empire. And if I refuse? Then you return to the brig until we reach the prison colony on Velix Prime. Though I suspect a mind like yours would wither in captivity." Raven ran his fingers through his dark hair, a habit from his academy days. The engineer in him was already itching to dig into this puzzle. And if he was honest with himself, the prospect of working with advanced Valaxian technology was more tempting than any offer of freedom. "I'll help," he said finally. "But I have conditions. I need access to your technical databases, a proper workspace, and—" He met her gaze directly. "I work as a colleague, not a prisoner." Thera studied him for a long moment, her scales shifting through patterns he couldn't interpret. Finally, she nodded. "Agreed. Though you'll be monitored, and any attempt to sabotage or escape will result in immediate execution." "Understood," Raven replied, already turning back to the holographic data. "When do we start?" "Now," Thera gestured, and the guards stepped forward with what appeared to be a tool belt. "Your equipment has been scanned and cleared. I suggest you familiarize yourself with our systems quickly. The first core showing signs of transformation is in Engineering Bay 3. As Raven followed her through the ship's winding corridors, he couldn't help but smile slightly. He'd expected to spend the next few years in a prison cell. Instead, he was about to get his hands on the most advanced technology in known space. True, one wrong move could get him killed, but that was hardly different from his regular engineering work. The engineering bay doors opened to reveal a sight that made his heart race, a quantum core twice the size of anything humans had developed, its crystalline structure pulsing with colors that shouldn't exist in normal space. Several Valaxian engineers looked up as they entered, their scales displaying various shades of what Raven was learning to recognize as surprise and uncertainty. "Well," he said, pulling out his diagnostic tools, "let's see what makes you tick." 3 days into his work on the quantum cores, Raven had barely slept. The Valaxian technology was fascinating, but more importantly, it was terrifying. The cores weren't just malfunctioning, they were developing patterns that seemed almost conscious. "Your scales are darkening again," Raven commented without looking up from his work. He'd learned to read Thera's moods through her color changes, though she seemed unsettled by his observations. "What's bothering you?" "The Council is demanding progress reports," Thera replied, moving closer to examine his latest diagnostic readings. "They're growing impatient." Raven straightened, stretching muscles cramped from hours of detailed work. "Tell them I've found something. But they're not going to like it." "Explain." He brought up a holographic model of the core's crystalline structure. "These patterns here, they're not random mutations. They're organized, purposeful. The cores are trying to communicate." Thera's scales shifted to a deep violet, a color he'd never seen on her before. "Communicate? With what?" "Each other, for starters. But I think..." He hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "I think they're trying to communicate with us too. We're just not listening in the right way." "Impossible. They're power sources, not sentient beings." "Maybe they were just power sources before," Raven countered, pulling up comparison data. "But look at these energy signatures. They're forming neural-like networks, creating pathways that mirror organic brain patterns. Your quantum cores are evolving." Before Thera could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. The holographic displays flickered, then stabilized, showing rapid changes in the core's energy patterns. "It's happening faster now," Raven muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. "The cores are linking up across the fleet. They're dash." The ship shuddered violently, throwing them both off balance. Raven caught Thera instinctively, noting absently that her scales were warm to the touch. "Engineering Bay 3 to bridge," Thera snapped into her communicator. "Report." "Multiple systems failing, Commander," a voice replied, tension evident even through the translator. "The cores are singing." Raven was already moving, pulling up ship-wide diagnostics. "Not singing, harmonizing. The frequency patterns, they're creating a resonance field across all ships. If we don't stabilize it, the fleet will tear itself apart," Thera finished. Her scales had shifted to deep crimson, a color Raven had learned meant decisive action was coming. "Can you stop it?" "Not stop it," he said, mind racing through possibilities. "But maybe we can join the conversation." Without waiting for permission, Raven began reconfiguring the core's containment fields. His fingers danced across the controls, making adjustments that would have given his old engineering professors heart attacks. "What are you doing?" Thera demanded, though she made no move to stop him. "The cores evolved to communicate. Fighting that evolution is what's causing the destructive resonance. But if we can match their frequency, create a controlled feedback loop." He looked up at her, excitement overshadowing exhaustion. "We might be able to establish a dialogue." "This is madness," she said, but her scales had shifted to a color he recognized as intrigue. "Welcome to human engineering," Raven grinned. "Sometimes madness is exactly what you need." The ship shuddered again as he initiated his modifications. The holographic displays erupted with new patterns, complex geometries that seemed to fold in on themselves in impossible ways. "There," he pointed to a recurring sequence. "That's not random. That's mathematics. Universal constants. They're trying to establish common ground." Thera leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his as she studied the patterns. These equations, they're describing spacetime at the quantum level. But with variations I've never seen. Not variations, Raven breathed, understanding dawning. Corrections. The cores aren't just power sources, they're windows into the fundamental nature of reality. And they're trying to show us what we've been getting wrong. More alarms blared, but these were different, not warnings, but acknowledgments. The destructive resonance was stabilizing, transforming into something harmonious. "Commander," the bridge officer's voice came through again. "The cores, they're stabilizing. Power levels are returning to normal, but the patterns. The patterns remain," Thera finished, looking at Raven with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Because they're supposed to." Raven nodded, already diving deeper into the new data streaming across his displays. "This is just the beginning. The cores aren't trying to destroy your ships, they're trying to upgrade them. But they needed us to understand first, to be ready to receive what they're offering." "And what exactly are they offering, Engineer Blackwood?" "Knowledge," he replied simply. "The kind that could transform both our civilizations. The question is, are your people ready for that kind of change?" Thera's scales shifted through several colors before settling on one he'd never seen, a shimmering gold that seemed to glow from within. "I believe the better question is, are our civilizations ready to face this transformation together?" The implications of her words hung in the air between them as they turned back to the displays, watching as the cores continued their cosmic dance of enlightenment. Raven knew that his world, everyone's world, was about to change forever. And somehow, he'd ended up right at the center of it all. The Valaxian High Council chamber was unlike anything Raven had ever seen. Crystalline spires stretched toward a ceiling that seemed to capture and refract starlight itself. The council members, 12 of the most powerful Valaxians in the Empire, sat in a semicircle before them, their scales shifting through colors of skepticism and concern. "You expect us to believe," Council Elder Vex spoke, his scales a challenging shade of amber, "that our quantum cores have developed consciousness? And that this human has somehow communicated with them?" "The evidence is irrefutable," Thera responded, her own scales maintaining a steady, confident blue. "Engineer Blackwood's insights have not only prevented a catastrophic failure but opened up possibilities we never imagined." Raven stepped forward, trying to ignore how the council members' scales rippled at his movement. "The cores aren't just conscious, they're trying to teach us. The mathematical principles they're sharing could revolutionize our understanding of spacetime itself." "And why?" another council member asked. "Would these supposedly sentient power sources choose to reveal themselves now?" "Because we're ready," Raven answered, pulling up a holographic display of the core's communication patterns. "Or rather, we have to be ready. There's something coming, something that requires both our species to evolve." The chamber erupted in murmurs as Raven displayed the latest data streams from the cores. Complex mathematical equations spiraled through the air, describing something that made even the most educated council members' scales pale. "These calculations," Council Elder Vex leaned forward, "they suggest a fundamental instability in the fabric of spacetime itself." "Yes," Thera confirmed, moving to stand beside Raven. "The cores aren't just power sources, they're sensors, detecting changes in the universe that our normal instruments can't perceive. Changes that could threaten everything." Raven manipulated the display, showing the progression of the instability. "The barrier between normal space and something else is weakening. The cores evolved to warn us, to help us prepare. But they need both human intuition and Valaxian technology to implement the solutions they're offering." "You propose an alliance?" one of the younger council members asked, their scales showing interest despite their obvious reservations. "I propose survival," Raven corrected. "What's coming doesn't care about our species' differences. Either we work together, or we face extinction separately." The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Raven could see the colors shifting across their scales, a symphony of emotion and calculation. There's more, Thera added, bringing up new data. The core's evolution, it's affecting us. Subtle changes in both human and Valaxian physiology when we work directly with them. Engineer Blackwood has begun showing sensitivity to quantum fluctuations, while our scientists are developing new intuitive approaches to problem solving. We're changing, Raven explained, because we have to change. The cores aren't just teaching us about the universe, they're preparing us to face what's coming. Council Elder Vex's scales shifted to a deep, contemplative purple. And if we refuse this evolution? If we shut down the cores and maintain our current path? Then we die, Raven said simply. Both our species, along with countless others. The barrier breach isn't just possible, it's inevitable. The only question is whether we'll be ready when it happens. The council members conferred among themselves, their scales creating a mesmerizing display of shifting colors. Finally, Elder Vex spoke again. We will need time to verify these findings, to consider the implications. But his scales shifted to a color Raven had never seen before, one that made Thera's eyes widen in surprise. We authorize continued cooperation between our species. Engineer Blackwood, you will work directly with our scientific council, sharing all human insights into this phenomenon. And what of the changes affecting our people? Another council member asked. These evolutionary effects? We monitor them, Thera answered firmly. We learn from them. And we prepare for whatever's coming. As they left the council chamber, Raven noticed Thera's scales had settled into that unique golden hue he'd seen before. That went better than expected, he commented. The color Elder Vex displayed, she explained, it hasn't been seen in our species for generations. It represents absolute certainty in the face of profound change. The last time it was recorded was when we first achieved quantum travel. So no pressure then, Raven smiled slightly. Just revolutionizing two civilizations while preparing for a cosmic catastrophe. Having second thoughts? About helping prevent the end of everything? No. He turned to face her. But I am wondering what these changes mean for us, human and Valaxian. We're not just sharing technology anymore. We're evolving together. Thera's scales rippled with what he'd learned to recognize as thoughtful amusement. Worried about growing scales, Engineer Blackwood? More worried about you developing a human sense of humor, he retorted, making her scales flicker with genuine mirth. Whatever's coming, whatever we're becoming, we're in this together now. Yes, she agreed, her scales settling into that golden hue once more. Together. The ancient Valaxian archives stretched for what seemed like miles beneath the capital city, their crystalline walls holding millennia of history. Raven stood before a particularly old section, its surface clouded with age, while Thera accessed the security protocols. These records haven't been accessed in over 1,000 years, she explained, her scales showing a mix of anticipation and concern. What we found in the quantum core's latest transmission, it led here. The wall before them shimmered and became transparent, revealing a chamber filled with artifacts that made Raven's engineering mind race with questions. But it was the central display that drew their attention, a crystalline structure eerily similar to the quantum cores. That's impossible, Raven breathed, approaching the ancient device. This technology shouldn't have existed back then. Perhaps it didn't, Thera replied, her scales shifting to a deep, thoughtful blue. At least, not originally. Their research over the past weeks had led them down an increasingly strange path. The quantum core's communications had begun including historical references, pointing to patterns throughout both human and Valaxian history. Patterns that suggested neither species' development had been entirely natural. The dating on these artifacts, Raven noted, examining the readings on his scanner, they're showing temporal inconsistencies. Like they exist in multiple time frames simultaneously. Look at this, Thera called from a nearby console. Ancient text scrolled across its surface, accompanied by diagrams that made Raven's head hurt to look at. "It's a warning, or perhaps a message." Raven moved to join her, their shoulders touching as they studied the text. His recently developed sensitivity to quantum fluctuations made him aware of a subtle resonance between them, another side effect of their work with the cores. "The barrier between spaces," he translated slowly, his understanding of Valaxian improving daily, "it's not weakening naturally. It's being eroded, deliberately." "By what?" "By us," a new voice answered. They turned to find Elder Vex emerging from the shadows, his scales a complex pattern Raven had never seen before. "Or rather, by what we will become." "Explain," Thera demanded, her scales darkening with suspicion. "The quantum cores," Vex moved closer to the ancient device, "they're not just teaching us. They're preparing us for what we already did, what we will do. Time, at the quantum level, is not as linear as we once believed." Raven's mind raced as pieces began falling into place. The evolutionary changes we're experiencing, the mathematical principles the cores are sharing, we're not just preparing for something coming from outside. We're preparing to become it, Thera finished, her scales paling with realization. The barrier breach, the temporal anomalies, they're all connected to our own evolution. Both our species, Vex confirmed, are approaching a point of transformation. The cores are both the cause and the effect, a temporal loop of our own creation. Raven turned back to the ancient device, seeing it with new understanding. This isn't just old technology. It's future technology, embedded in the past to guide our development. We sent it to ourselves. But why? Thera asked, her scales showing confusion despite her controlled voice. Why such an elaborate mechanism spanning millennia? Because, Raven said slowly, whatever we're becoming, whatever humanity and the Valaxians are evolving into, it needed both of us. Our strengths, our differences, our unique approaches to understanding reality itself. The cores aren't just power sources or teachers, Vex added. They're anchors, holding reality stable while we undergo a transformation that would otherwise tear the universe apart. The implications were staggering. Every advancement, every conflict, every seemingly random encounter between their species had been leading to this moment. Even Raven's capture and involvement with the cores had been part of a plan set in motion by their future selves. So what now? Thera asked, her scales settling into that familiar golden hue that Raven had come to associate with decisive moments. Now, Raven replied, reaching for her hand without thinking, surprised when she didn't pull away, we embrace the change. We prepare our people for what's coming, what we're becoming. The Council will resist, Vex warned, though his scales showed resignation rather than opposition. They can resist all they want, Raven smiled slightly. According to these records, they'll come around. After all, they already did. Thera's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. Time travel makes tense agreement rather complicated, doesn't it? That's what you focus on. Raven laughed. Not the fact that we're apparently destined to evolve into beings capable of manipulating space-time itself? One impossible thing at a time, Engineer Blackwood, she replied, her scales showing a warmth he'd never seen before. Though I suppose we should stop being surprised by impossibilities. We seem to be making a habit of them. As they left the archives, Raven could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on them. But mixed with that pressure was something else, excitement, possibility, the thrill of standing on the brink of the greatest transformation in the history of both their species. Together, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Together, Thera confirmed, her scales glowing with that now familiar gold. After all, we already have been, will be, and are. The quantum core chamber pulsed with energy as reality itself seemed to bend around them. Raven's enhanced senses could perceive the fluctuations in space-time, while Thera's scales reflected colors that hadn't existed before their transformation began. All cores across the fleet are synchronized, reported the chief scientist, her scales showing a mix of fear and anticipation. The harmonic resonance is approaching critical levels. Not critical, Raven corrected, his consciousness expanded by weeks of accelerated evolution. Optimal. The universe isn't breaking, it's opening. Through the chamber's viewing windows, they could see the combined fleet of human and Valaxian ships arranged in a precise geometric pattern. Each vessel's quantum core pulsed in perfect synchronization, creating a lattice of energy that stretched between them. The council chambers are secured, Elder Vex announced, entering the chamber. His scales showed the same golden hue that had become increasingly common among those working closely with the cores. The temporal shielding should protect them during the transition. Thera moved to stand beside Raven at the main control interface. The calculations are complete. What we're about to attempt has already succeeded, Raven finished, sharing a knowing smile with her. Remember the archives? The evidence of our future selves? That doesn't make it any less terrifying in the present moment. The chamber shuddered as another wave of quantum energy washed through the fleet. The transformation that had begun with Raven's first interaction with the cores had spread, affecting both humans and Valaxians who worked with them. Enhanced consciousness, sensitivity to quantum states, even the ability to perceive multiple timelines simultaneously, they were becoming something new. Final preparations are complete, Vex reported. All non-essential personnel have been evacuated to the shielded zones. Raven looked at the assembled team, human and Valaxian scientists working together, their differences forgotten in the face of their shared evolution. What we're about to do will change everything. Not just our future, but our past as well. Once we initiate the final sequence, there's no going back. There never was, Thera replied, her scales showing a complex pattern that somehow conveyed both certainty and affection. Every moment has led to this. The quantum core's resonance reached a new pitch, one that Raven could feel in his very atoms. The barrier between normal space and what lay beyond was growing thinner by the second. Energy levels at maximum, called out a human scientist. Quantum field integrity at 99.9%. Begin the final sequence, Thera commanded, her voice steadied despite the enormity of what they were about to attempt. Raven's hands moved across the controls, initiating the carefully calculated process that would transform both their species. The chamber filled with light as the quantum core's energy peaked. Barrier breach in 10 seconds, Vex announced. 9, 8. Raven felt Thera's hand find his, their enhanced perceptions allowing them to share the moment across multiple levels of reality. 7, 6, 5. Remember, Raven said to the assembled team, what we become here doesn't just change our future. It creates our past. Everything that led us to this moment. 4, 3, 2. We're about to set it all in motion, Thera finished. 1. The universe seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Then reality itself opened up around them. The barrier between normal space and what lay beyond dissolved, not with violence but with a sense of rightness, of completion. The transformation was both instantaneous and eternal. Raven felt his consciousness expand beyond the limits of linear time, aware of every moment that had led to this and every moment that would follow. Beside him, Thera's form shifted, becoming something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Through their enhanced perception, they could see the changes rippling backward through time, the placement of the ancient devices in the archive, the development of the quantum cores, even the seemingly random events that had brought them together. It's beautiful, Thera's voice echoed across multiple planes of existence. We never truly understood until now. The combined fleet began to shift, the ships merging into structures that defied conventional geometry. Human and Valaxian alike were changing, becoming something that their former selves could barely comprehend. The temporal loop is stable, Vex reported, his form now a complex pattern of quantum possibilities. Our past selves will find the guidance we've left for them. Raven could see it all now, the grand design that they had both discovered and created. The quantum cores hadn't just been power sources or teachers, they had been glimpses of what they would become, reaching back through time to guide their own evolution. Was it worth it? Thera asked, her consciousness intertwined with his across dimensions. Giving up what we were to become this? Raven considered the question across multiple timelines simultaneously. He could see every moment they had shared, every challenge they had faced, every discovery that had led them here. But more importantly, he could see what they had become, not just individually, but together. We haven't given up anything, he replied. We've become more than we ever imagined possible. And we did it together. Around them, the transformed fleet began its journey into a new realm of existence. They would explore realms beyond normal spacetime, seed the galaxies with the quantum cores that would guide their past selves, and shepherd the evolution of countless species. But through it all, through every dimension and timeline, Raven and Thera remained connected, a bridge between human and Valaxian, past and future, what was and what would be. They had become something new, something unprecedented. And somewhere, in what used to be normal space, their past selves were just beginning the journey that would lead them to this moment of transformation. The cycle was complete. The evolution had succeeded. And the universe would never be the same.